Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to announce that Smooth Sack Summer is officially upon us. When you're playing in the summer sun, make sure you're groomed from pubes to bum. Thanks to our friends at Manscaped, you can make this season your smoothest yet. The Performance Package 5.0 Ultra is the ultimate bundle to keep your boys downstairs cool while looking hot. Join the 10 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with our exclusive offer. Get 20% off plus free shipping when you go to manscaped.com and use code THPN. Summertime and the trimmin' is easy. The Manscaped Performance Package 5.0 Ultra has everything you need to prepare that summer bod. Inside this package, you'll find the star of the show, the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. Their 5th generation trimmer features 2 interchangeable next-gen skin-safe blade heads, a standard one for taking a little off the top, and a new foil blade to go smooth wherever your heart desires. Now that you have the perfect haircut, use Manscaped's liquid formulations to keep the freshness even at the hottest summer barbecues. The Crop Soother Aftershave Lotion and Crop Preserver Anti-Chafe Ball Deodorant. Once they touch your sack, you'll never go back. Get 20% off plus free shipping with code THPN at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with code THPN at manscaped.com. It's Smooth Sack Summer, boys. Get on board or get left behind. What's up and welcome to another episode of the Grindline Podcast. You're listening to episode 280. I am your host, Greg. I am joined tonight by OHL prospect coverage and director of scouting for McKeen's, Brock Otten, to talk a little bit about the draft. But Brock, how you doing tonight?
Good. How you doing, Greg?
I'm good. Just a little tired. Like I said, I probably, as soon as I hit end recording, I'm probably gonna go pass out. My kid woke me up at 4 a.m. and proceeded to not go back to bed. So it's been a rough night. But you've been pretty busy lately, huh? With the draft coming, your time's about to be like pretty easy after the draft, right?
Yeah, you know what? I would say not quite after the draft. The week after the draft, there's a lot of requests too for people who are looking for information on the players their
Who are
organization
our
has just
guys?
drafted. Right. Yeah, exactly. So I would say the week following that, so 2 weeks after the draft, is when things start to get pretty quiet.
How quickly do you start ramping up for the next draft?
Well, you're always kind of keeping that in the back of your mind, like especially as somebody who covers Ontario. Like I could give you a list of an early 2025 list of players that I really like. But I would say for me personally, when Canada's Holinka camp sort of kicks off, uh, that's sort of when I start to ramp up a little bit. We do a yearbook at McKeen's, if you're not familiar, which is like the NHL and all predictions for that, but also prospects. So it's kind of like an extension of the prospect guide that we're going to chat about tonight. Uh, and a lot of work goes into that over the summer too, in terms of ranking prospects and slotting the 2024 guys into the grand scheme of things. And yeah, so a lot of work goes into that. And then once that's out of the way, there's a bit of rest, and then it's rinse, repeat, on to the next draft.
Yeah, I have a lot of I give you guys a lot of props. Every time I go back and look at draft rankings pre-draft and then go back post-draft, I go, man, McKeen's was real close. And it's even on some of the ones where like they had him rank as guys ranked like 5 slots lower or 2, 3, 4 slots higher, and you guys are like one off. And I'm like, it seems really close. And then I think you just captured all Red Wings fans' hearts by recently ranking the Red Wings prospect pool number 1 in the NHL, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the show. But what I want to kind of go over first is just I want to get your overall feelings on the draft. And I feel like since before the season, people are like, this draft's not going to be as great as last draft. It's a little bit weaker. So if you're trying to trade a first round pick, this a mid to later first round pick, this might be the first one to do. What's your overall feeling on like the strength of the draft compared to previous years?
Yeah, it's really grown on me over the course of the year. I felt at the beginning of the year, even upwards to, I would say, like the World Juniors, up to December or January, I would say that I was kind of lukewarm on the draft. Obviously, Celebrini looked great, and you were getting a potential star player at number one. And then there was a glut of defensemen that looked like, they'd be able to play in some capacity. But I think what really has elevated this group is the encouraging progress of the forwards available in the second half. You've got a lot of players who really made positive strides. Tija Ginla, Beckett Seneca, um, there's Jet Luchenko, Michael Hage. Like we could go down the list of guys that are available probably or possibly when Detroit picks. And I think that's really added to the overall high end depth of the group. I would have said maybe at the beginning of the year or even into, like I said, December, January, that I felt like the top end group kind of cut off around like 7, maybe 8. And I would say that extends almost to like in that 13 or 14 range. I know that's just before Detroit picks, and I'm sure that's something we're gonna chat about. But yeah, I do feel good about this draft class now. I think that there's a chance that teams are going to get some really high end players. Maybe not stars. I don't think we're looking at a draft that's going to bring a ton of star power. Maybe outside of Celebrini, maybe outside of Demidov, or a couple guys who end up surprising. But I think you're going to get a lot of good, solid, long time contributors. Lots of top six forwards, lots of top four defenders. Yeah, I the draft has grown on me overall.
Nice. Now, onto the teams aspect of it. We all know that the draft might be as nice as we think it is, and the players might be as good as we think they are, but the teams always get weird. So, do you hear anything? You looking around, you go, man. And then we heard that Utah is open to trading like the sixth overall pick. We've had some odd picks in the last few years, like guys taken way higher than we thought they should be. Like I think Slavkovsky was one of the more recent ones, like was taken higher. Now he's a good player and he's
Mhm.
developed really well, but on draft night was taken higher than they thought he should be. Are you sensing any kind of weirdness going into this one, or do you think this might be a more even keeled kind of draft?
I think with the tiers that we sort of have in place right now, I don't know if there's anything that's going to be incredibly shocking. Like, I think anybody in that sort of tier that I mentioned earlier, that top 12, top 13, if they go anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to that range, I don't think it's going to be shocking. If somebody outside of that range kind of creeps into the top 7 or 8, I think that would be shocking. Um, but I would expect this draft to go a little bit maybe more according to plan or according to the rankings that we see, because even though there's a lot of variance within that top end, it's the same players, right? And that's usually an omen that we're going to see a draft that kind of plays out a little bit according to a preset plan. I think the big wild card is at 3. I think at this point we know Celebrini is going 1. It sounds like Levshinov is going 2. At least it sounds that way. Maybe it's Demidov, maybe it's Levshinov, but it sounds like it's probably going to be one of those two. And then at 3, it's Anaheim, and that's where I think things get really messy. It could be Salayev. We see a lot of people mocking Salayev to Anaheim, us included. We hear their interest in Lidstrom. We hear their interest in a lot of the defenders available. So what they do, I think, is going to dictate sort of what happens with the rest of the group. Maybe people trade down, people trade up, people trade out completely for players. It's going to be very interesting, I think, after 3.
But nothing weird enough to like Zeev Booyam dropping to number 15. Nothing like that.
Look, it's every draft somebody drops, and that's sort of the one thing that I wanted to highlight with 15 is I think the Wings are in a good spot because I do feel pretty confident that somebody from that group is going to drop. Somebody is going to break into that group, maybe in like 12, 13 range. Maybe it's Solberg from Norway. Maybe it's another forward. Maybe it's another defender that drops. Maybe Karim Yakimchuk falls into Detroit's lap. Maybe Costa Hellenius drops. Maybe Berkeley Catton drops. That's who we have sort of falling to the Wings in our mock draft. I think that there's very good likelihood that one of the decently skilled players falls to Detroit at 15. I think they're in a good spot. I think if you were picking at 16 or 17, I think the likelihood of that is much more slim. But I do like where Detroit slots it.
We're in the super weird middle zone where literally anything could happen. And it normally goes to Steve Eiserman's favor. Maybe Steve Eiserman will draft a Cole Eiserman, and maybe Cole Eiserman will fall to 15. But I want to hear, I'm going to ask you for 3 names of guys that you think are available in that range, and then kind of who your pick is and why.
Okay, yeah. So the first name I'll mention is Berkeley Catton. I don't think he's available. I think it's in all likelihood he ends up going. But if there is a guy that falls in that range, it could be him. Just because he's not the biggest. There are some concerns about durability there with the way that he plays, um, and he would be an absolutely ideal fit for Detroit. And in my opinion, the one thing that this Detroit system is kind of lacking, and I think even on the pro team currently, I think something that's holding them back from sort of reaching that next level in their retool, rebuild, whatever you want to call it, is just another high end skill, high end play creator. playmaker, somebody who can drive play. And I think that's the one thing that's missing. And I think that needs to be the target. I think that ideally you're looking for a forward who can really drive play and has a high IQ and can fit in with what Detroit has built so far. And Catton is one guy that I think fits that bill if he falls. I think maybe more realistic, you could be looking at a guy like Michael Hage. Depending on where you look, the rankings for him are sort of all over the place. We've got him fairly high at 12, but he's as low as the later first in some rankings, and it just depends on how you view his year. He had a very challenging year personally. If you haven't read up about what happened with him, but he lost his father and his billet mother in a matter of basically a month at the in the off season, and that had to really weigh on him. And he missed a lot of last year as well with injuries. Didn't play a ton for Chicago. It took him a while to really get going on a mediocre Chicago Steel team, not quite as good as Chicago has been the last few years. But when he did, he was electric. He's among, in my opinion, the higher upside players that will be available for Detroit at 15. And I think that needs to be the target, right? Yes, there is sort of a bust factor there. I think that Hage's off puck play needs to improve, needs to become more consistent. But if everything falls into place, you're looking at, a Mark Scheifele, Jack Eichel type of player. And that's the kind of power center that Hage could be. And I think that would really fit in well in Detroit. I think it would really elevate their current group. And then another name I'll throw at you, I think he'll probably be available in that range. And I've actually seen him mocked, I think, a few times to Detroit, and that's Jet Luchenko, the Guelph Storm, the OHL. Really high IQ guy, really good playmaker, lots of speed, kind of like a Dylan Larkin type. And I think there are some concerns that maybe the upside isn't higher than a versatile middle six guy, but personally, I really like him. I think that he's sort of just scratching the surface of what he's capable of as a creative player. And I think in terms of utilizing his speed, I think that when you watch him play, even though he's incredibly quick, he's not somebody who plays with sort of a feverish pace, if you will. He's somebody who's very calculated and poised. And I think that as he gets stronger, he's going to be able to sort of unlock his ability to use his speed more, especially with the puck on his stick. And I think that I think either of those three could be great. I'll throw another name at you as a faller in Constant Hellenius, another type of high IQ, high skill, high determination, great work ethic. Somebody who I think can move quickly through the system as well. I think the one thing that Detroit, and sorry for the long-winded answer here, I just think
Oh
the
no,
one
you're
thing that
good.
that Detroit sort of should be shying away from is that sort of safe physical forward. I love Branson Nygaard out of
Okay.
Norway, but I just don't know if that's a great fit. I really think that he probably projects similar to Marco Kasper. And do the Wings really need more guys like
No.
Kasper, like Michael Rasmussen, right? Like Nate Danielson might even fit into that category a little bit, right? So Carter Mazur, like we could just go down the list. It's those types of players that the Wings have in abundance. And I think the one thing they really need to focus on is high-end playmaking, creativity, and skill.
Yeah, I agree there. I think it's time to go for a guy that you look and you say, man, in 3 years when he's in the system or 4 years when he's in the system, he could be you want a guy who's like, you could, he has the ability to be a 30 plus goal scorer. That's what you want. You need someone to complement when Dylan Larkin is in his early 30s and Alex DeBrincat's in his early 30s. You need another guy who can come in, develop through the system, isn't going to cost you, I mean, at that point, probably $10+ million, $11 million to go put pucks in the net. You need a
Mhm.
prospect who can come in a couple years, get to that kind of level. And I agree. I think we need to take a guy who is not just the Yzerman build recently has been big, like you said, big, physical, tall, heavy. Not necessarily maybe physical, but big, tall, heavy. What you could maybe make into a power forward. And I don't think he can shy away this time. It may be taking someone with a little less size, but has the ability to go out and with some really good skating, go score a ton of goals. And you're right about Hage and the fact that he is ranked anywhere between 12 and 36. That is a pretty big gap there. I do like the Berkeley Catton pick. I want to know a little bit though about the difference between his 2022-23 and 2023-24 season, because getting 55 points in 63 games to 116 points in 68 games just seems like an insane jump.
Yeah, and not even on a terrific team either. Like, he wasn't on a double WHL powerhouse, right? We're not talking about somebody who was surrounded by a ton of high end talent. So on a lot of nights, it was the Berkeley Catton show, and I think that's incredibly impressive. I think that this is a player who pretty much has everything going for him other than high end size. So it's a matter of whether you believe he's going to be able to play through the middle with the same kind of efficiency at his size at the NHL level. Some guys can, some guys can't, and it's just a matter of where your organization falls on that topic.
Yeah, Berkeley Catton is ranked as high as number 3 by our friend Tony Ferrari, and as low as number 5, oh, right at 15 too by Malloy. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a great pick. And like you said, so if you're looking at guys with size, he's 5'11", 174 pounds currently based on elite
Mhm.
prospects. So a little smaller, but we've seen guys grow 2 inches and put on 15 pounds post draft year.
Mhm.
So he could make it to 6 feet tall. He could get up. I mean, he even at 5'11" can get up into the probably 185, 190 area within a couple years. And I see like to see a jump in offense like that, and even how you said just still not on a great team, but also, and then again, just I hate this stat, but plus minus wise,
Mhm.
in 2022-23, he was a minus 36. And in 2023-24, he was a plus 15. So that makes it also sound like maybe he has also improved his two-way game a little bit more.
Yeah, I think he that's one of the biggest parts of his game that has improved the most. It's one thing that our Western scouts at McKeen's really loved about his play this year was the improved consistency in his off puck play, and that motor, that forechecking ability, that PK ability were all things that really made him a more versatile player this year, and not just sort of an offensive juggernaut, not just somebody who can make things happen with the puck, but who's making a difference without the puck, and that ultimately that's going to be the key for him at the NHL level. And like you said, adding size without sacrificing his elusiveness, right? His skating ability is one of his strengths. He needs to be able to add muscle and bulk up a little bit without sacrificing any of that quickness.
So I know the question every prospect person hates: NHL comps. Who would you give as an NHL comp for someone like Berkeley Catton?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think like realistically, you're probably looking at maybe a guy like Braden Point. I think that kind of difference maker, somebody who is just so well rounded and can play in any situation. Equal parts goal scorer, playmaker, good skater, impactful player without the puck, impactful player with the puck. I think best case scenario, you're probably looking at that kind of player in terms of an impact.
So top six forward, exactly what the
Mhm.
Red Wings should be looking for. I think we're past the point of drafting high end defensemen considering our pipeline. I think honestly, I think this is the offseason where you might see a defensive prospect be traded simply
Mhm.
because of the just glut of defensemen that we got, and then you just get a couple more last year, and then Andrew Gibson's looking pretty good, so you're going to have to find some room for him too. And yeah, I think it's going to be a very forward heavy draft for the Red Wings, unless they grab a defenseman that they can keep overseas for a little bit,
Or
and
somebody
not.
who falls, right? Like,
Yeah,
let's say hypothetically, Carter Yakimchuk is available at 15, or St. Perek or Z Williams somehow fall to that range.
miraculously.
Miraculously, right? Over size concerns or projection concerns, or what be it, or a guy like Anton Salayev, right? You never know with the Russian factor these days. Like if one of those high end defenders ends up falling to 15, I think you have to take them if you're Detroit, and then you move from your greatest strength as an organization to fill those gaps of your weaknesses, right? Like if you're Detroit and one of those players falls into your lap, do you then turn to Carolina and say, hey, we've got Simon Edvinsson, we've got Marco Kasper, we've got some players who, could be available if Martin Nikash is on the table, right? There's a player that, could really help Detroit right now and help them get over that hump. So I think you kind of look at it with an open mind. You have an idea of what you want and what you want for your organization. But at the end of the day, if somebody you really like falls into your lap at 15, I think you have to pull the trigger there and then, you know, figure it out later on.
Yeah, I agree. Either that or you start fielding phone calls of people to trade back a couple spots and then still get the guy that you want at that position, anyways.
Mhm.
So we're going to do real quick. We're going to take a quick break for word from DraftKings. We'll be right back to talk about the Red Wings prospect pool, favorite prospects in the system, and then some listener questions. So give us just 1 second for word from DraftKings. We're this close to crowning the Stanley Cup champion, and with the action heating up on the ice, it's even hotter at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. New to DraftKings? Listen up. New customers can get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500. Just deposit at least $5 and you'll get a bonus bet back equal to your first bet if it doesn't hit. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500 if your first bet doesn't hit. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or in West Virginia, www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPENY or text HOPENY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas. 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction, void in Ontario. One no sweat bet per new customer issued as one bonus bet based on amount of initial losing bet. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See dkng.co/ice for eligibility, wagering, and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gaming resources. Copyright NHL 2024, all rights reserved. And we're back. And as everyone knows, McKeen's has just recently ranked the Detroit Red Wings prospect pool #1 in the NHL. It kind of falls in line with what the Athletic's been doing. A couple other sources. We're generally in the past couple years have been top 5. Yzerman, I will say Yzerman, I think historically has been pretty good at drafting. And he just keeps doing that here. And you've got guys like Nate Danielson, you've got guys like Marco Kasper, Simon Edvinsson, who is still considered a prospect until he plays probably this
Mhm.
next season. What did you guys really like? I guess first, like, what was your criteria,
Mhm.
and what kind of made the Red Wings jump that high?
Yeah, so we kind of went at it from more of like a quantitative, more objective approach. So we looked at our top 200 and we kind of broke it down with, okay, how many top 25 players, how many top 50, how many top 100, how many top 200 does each team have, and then sort of gave it a weighted formula to put more emphasis on those top 25 and top 50 guys, and then went at it from there. And Detroit obviously finished very high, even though they didn't have anybody in our top 10. They did have 5 players in our top 50, and it's that really good high end depth that I think makes this system one of the best in the NHL.
Yeah, there was a couple, like, I was going through and I'm like, I could make a case for a couple other people. Like you said, though, there's our top 10. There's probably not much between like number 10 and number like 13 on the
Mhm,
list because Dmitry Buchelnikov came in at number 10. I probably could have just as easily saw that as Albert Johansson. Albert
mhm.
Johansson, who will probably be in the NHL next year, super strong, just like defensive defenseman who's
Yep.
just had a very solid defensive game. And I think that's what it is. It's not just like you said, you've got like one guy, two guys in the top like 10, one guy in the top 10, one guy in the top 30, and then you don't have another guy until in the 70s or 80s. I think it's just the quality of middle end talent. I mean, I would consider Simon Edvinson's high end talent. I consider
Yes,
him
I
high end
agree.
talent.
Yep.
Nate Danielson, he's done a lot better. He's improved pretty greatly. He's looking like kind of maybe a miniature Dylan Larkin out there. Marco Kasper, we thought might have been a little bit higher, but now he's looking like maybe a third line, rough, like piss you off kind of center. Is so that's just what it is just the variance in it, but all decently high level.
Yeah, that's it 100%. It's the high end depth, if you will. It's not just depth in the system. I would sort of classify Montreal as a system that has really great depth, but just not quite as much high end depth as Detroit. But at the end of the day, this is all very subjective, right? I think that those teams within our sort of top 5 or top 6 are pretty interchangeable. It's just a matter opinion. It's a matter of what you weigh more too, right? When certain places are doing these kinds of rankings, you mentioned the Athletic, the Hockey News, lots of places do these types of organizational rankings. Some places put more emphasis on just those top 10, top 15 guys, those guys that are, the best prospects in the NHL. And if you've got one of those in your system, that outweighs the depth for some people. Whereas we at McKeen's, we kind of value system depth a little bit more because these are prospects. These are not sure things. And if you have quite a few players in your system who look good and look like future NHL players, it's going to increase your odds of hitting on multiple players and not just one or two.
All right, favorite prospect in the system.
Uh, does it have to be one of the high end guys, or can it be
No, no,
one of the
just
lower
who's
end
the guy
guys?
you really like.
I really like the. Well, I'll give you a couple answers. The one that's a little bit higher end. I really like the step forward that Sandy Pellikka did this year. I think that he really progressed in the defensive end. I think he's still got a ways to go, and I'm glad that he's going to stay in Sweden next year and play out there because I think it's best for his development. But I really like the steps forward that he took defensively this year to round out his game, and I think he looks like a really solid pick by Detroit. I think somebody that can really help this team in the long run. I think maybe a bit of a different look than some of the other defenders that Detroit has in the system. I think he's better offensively, possibly than Edvinsson, almost certainly than Wallinder, almost certainly compared to Andrew Gibson or Albert Johansson, like you said. So I think that this is sort of Detroit's chance of developing a really good power play guy and a really good transition player from the back end. The other one I would say that's a little bit further down is Amadeus Lombardi. I think maybe he was a little bit disappointing in his first pro year, but at the end of the day, this is a player whose biggest weakness was strength on the puck. And I think that was very obvious in his play in the AHL this year. I think it's why he was sort of forced a little bit further down the lineup and what ended up being, a championship caliber team. So there's nothing to be ashamed of there. But I think this is somebody that can really take a really nice next step forward next year or the year after when everything sort of catches up for him. I think that the skating is high end. I think the creativity as a playmaker is high end. I think that he's somebody that I think as he gets stronger, I think we're going to see him become a really consistent player off the puck. I think this is somebody who can be a really consistent middle six guy for the Red Wings for a long time. It's just a matter of being patient because development is non-linear. These guys are going to develop at different paces. For every Marco Kasper who is essentially a man and has been so for a few years, you have a kid like Amadeus who needs to catch up physically.
Yeah, and he knows it too. There was an interview with Dan Cleary where Amadeus Lombardi said, "Man, I go into the face-off dot against these guys in the AHL, and I can't even move their stick." And to your credit, what he says is like, "I need to bulk up. I need to get stronger. I need to be harder on the puck." And it's good that he identifies that and he knows, and it's something that he's working on. Because, like you said, in 2 years from now, he could be much bulkier, and then you've got a real like an offensive threat because that's what he is. He knows how to put the puck in the net. And that was actually one of the questions that we got. Do you think that he is more likely a center or a winger in the NHL?
I think the jury is still out on that. I think it just depends on, how much can he bulk up? How much does his play away from the puck improve at the pro level? I think at the OHL level, it got to a point where I would say it was very solid, but at the pro level, it's totally different, right? And I think that's to be determined, personally. It's interesting that you mentioned Dan Cleary too, because I think this is the perfect guy to have guiding some of these prospects. Because Dan was a player who really needed to make some adjustments to his game to be a solid pro. Right when he was drafted, there was a lot of hype surrounding him and his offensive upside, and he took a really long time, and it took a long time for him to figure out how he needed to play to be an NHL player. And I think he has to have a ton of wisdom to provide these young players on what it takes to be an NHL player because his career arc was a little bit non-traditional compared to some other players, at least those high end guys.
Yeah, that's interesting. He's gone through the same thing that a lot of these guys are going through right now. So maybe, yeah, like you say, it's better to maybe speak on it because he's like, hey, I've been there. And this is what I did to change my trajectory and to move into the player that I was and play as long as I did. So yeah, I really respect it. So Dan Cleary, the player toward the end, uh, not so much, but Dan Cleary, like the dude and the development guy and the rookie guy, I have a lot of respect for what Dan Cleary does. From Montana Mustangs, why have the Red Wings been playing it so safe with high floor players they feel will play in the league instead of taking big shots on high potential players that they could possibly miss on? They also mentioned Trevor Connolly. We talked a little bit off air about Trevor Connolly. Or do we pick another two-way middle six guy? And I think we've talked a little bit about it, but
Mhm. Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's sort of two answers to this. One is there is a belief that drafting these types of players will help you get over the hump because when you look at playoff rosters, Florida is a great example. The teams are littered with these types of heavy forwards, these heavy two-way high IQ guys. Those are the guys that teams are winning with in the playoffs these days. I think also teams kind of fall into a trap when you're where Detroit is, right? You're kind of picking in that middle ground, and there's a tendency to maybe focus on rounding out your roster and taking more safe players because you kind of envision that there could be some cap issues in the future. So now that you're trying to escape the rebuild and become a consistent threat in the conference, you want to have guys who can play and play decently sized roles in your lineup for cheap. And I think sort of it's a double edged sword, right? Like yes, those types of players are incredibly valuable. If you don't have to give up a first or second round pick at the deadline for a really good, heavy third line player, if you can grow them and draft them, it gives you a major advantage. But at the same time, you have to put the puck in the net to win hockey games. And you need skilled players to bring out the best in those heavy players, right? So I think that teams sometimes neglect that fact. And I think that this is where teams kind of get stuck in a bit of limbo. And it's kind of where I see Detroit right now, right? Like they're kind of stuck in no man's land. And they need to figure out a way to get over that hump and take that next step. And I think one of the key things that they need to do is focus on bringing in a high skill forward, either through the draft, through a trade, through a signing. I think bringing in those types of playmakers to bring out the best in guys like Mike Rasmussen, like Marco Kasper, if they envision him, playing a third or fourth line role this year. To bring out the best in those guys, you need high end playmakers.
the nice part about that is Steve Eiserman has built what we affectionately call a rolling cap, where he doesn't lock enough people up that all end at the same time. He's got guys falling off almost every year to be able to make moves like that. And then he has stockpiled all of these prospects and guys that, like you said, that teams need in the playoffs. We've got some that we can trade for pieces like that. And then if
Mhm.
you think you're going to make the playoffs and that maybe next year, instead of picking at 15, you're going to pick at 20, then you can trade next year's first round pick along with some prospects to really bring in the high end guys because we all know Detroit's record of getting shafted in the lottery and not being able to pick that top 3 talent and then just get that star power in the lineup, and trading for star power costs so much. You're going to have to get in and do it without that kind of player, which is even harder. So maybe that's part of it. When an Eiserman's like, man, I got to pick all these guys that other NHL teams are going to want around the trade deadline so that I can get that another 30 goal scorer. I can get a top 4 right defenseman, which is really what they need right now.
Yeah, and I think if you can't find it at the draft, you can't find it in free agency, you do have to look at the trade market, right? We mentioned Martin Nikesh earlier. Trevor Zegras is another name out there who would really inject some skill into Detroit's lineup. Does he come with some awards? Absolutely. But um, most often, those types of players do, right? And that's why you surround them with the glue types that you just mentioned.
So, from our friend Lars at Lars Thorsel over on Twitter, why are we seeing such enormous swings in the different draft boards? He says it's been like this the last couple of years. Is it because people are more interested in writing about prospects, or is there something else at play? For example, Alphonse Frey, for example, between 19 and 50.
The reality is there's just more scouting organizations, right? The draft has always been this way. There's always been variance of opinion, right? If you were to look at the NHL draft boards, like of teams specifically, year after year, you'd be shocked at what they look like, right? But now we're seeing more and more amateur scouting organizations in the public sphere, which means more rankings, which means more variance of opinion, right? And that's why you're seeing guys like Alphonse Fry ranked in the mid first or the late second. That's why you're seeing guys like Michael Hage ranked 12th or in the early second. Right? There's scouting is an imperfect science. You wish it wasn't, but human beings
Your job
are
would be
are
a lot easier, huh?
yeah, it sure would. Human beings are unpredictable. As much as you think you have it down to a science, you don't. You're not going to be perfect with your picks, right? And everybody has personal preferences. Everybody has personal opinions on players. It depends when you saw the player. It depends how you saw the player. Um, Depends who you're talking to. There's so many different things that go into these kinds of rankings, and um, that's some organizations spend more time on analytics, some spend more time on video, some are balancing live viewings from video viewings. It's all over the map, and personally I love it. Yes, it provides more competition to a place like McKeen's, who has been around for quite some time, but it brings out the best in us, and it brings out the best and increases interest overall in hockey prospecting, for lack of a better term, right? You look at baseball, for example, or football, where that is huge, right? Like, how long has Baseball America been around just through, how they cover MLB prospects in the draft and college baseball and the NFL combine and the NFL draft are and have always been an absolute spectacle, right? The NBA to a certain degree as well, but now we're seeing sort of the NHL catch up. We're seeing more and more people become interested in the NHL draft. We're seeing more people become interested in NHL prospects and the idea and the concept of scouting. So whenever you have more people doing it, you're going to get a wider variety of opinion.
Now, this isn't on here, but I'm just going to off the cuff question because I've heard it discussed recently. I just remembered. Do you think the draft is too long?
Uh, at 7 rounds, well, it used to be nine, right? And then we cut it to
Yep.
seven. Um, Actually, I was thinking about this the other day. It's funny that you ask. That would we be more would it more beneficial if the draft was shorter, but we gave teams a couple ELCs or some sort of flexibility post draft to sign guys who are not drafted, kind of like the MLB system, right? Where teams have a certain amount of money they can spend on players after the draft. Would some sort of flexible system like that be better? I don't know. As somebody who covers the draft, I'm obviously a draft nerd. I love the fact that it's 7 rounds. I wish it was 15
More
rounds.
rounds,
I could,
30
yeah,
rounds.
yeah. Let's just sit there like for 25 hours straight at the NHL draft. Let's have it a 4-day thing. Um, that's going to be a different opinion than a lot of people. I feel like day two just keeps getting longer and longer as somebody who's actually there at the event. It moves quickly, but it does seem like it's getting longer. So I do wonder what the future holds for the event, because it's a longer one than most of the professional sports. But I think part of it too is these players are drafted with very distant futures in mind, right? When you're looking at the MLB, these guys are getting drafted and they're going right into the minor leagues, right? You're signed, you're right into single A, double A, not so
Yep.
much double A, but usually some sort of lower end minor league system. NFL, you're drafted and you're playing pro right away. Boom, done. Maybe you're on the practice roster, but more often than not, you're playing a role. The NBA, the vast majority of them, again, on the main roster, you got some that go to the G League, but again, they're turning pro, whereas the NHL is totally different, right?
Yeah.
These guys are going to college. They're playing in a feeder league like the CHL. They're playing in different leagues in Europe. You might not see them sign a contract for 3 or 4 years. So it's a totally different system. And I think that's why having so many rounds makes sense, because there are so many different factors that go into the NHL draft compared to some of the other major sports leagues.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that and we talked last week to Dan Watson, Griffin's head coach,
Mhm.
and we talked a little bit about the CHL versus the NCAA. And you get the guys, like you said, in football, they come from the NCAA. They are in their 20s. They come right onto a roster, as to where you're drafting guys at 18 years old, and then you're sending them to college. And that's why people like to bash on the. There's people that like to bash on the NHL draft, like, why aren't these guys over here? Why is it taking so long over there? I'm like, you must watch other sports, because that's what happens in other sports, because when they draft them, they're a lot older, as to
Mhm.
where 18-year-old kid is not going to just strap on skates and get out there and just get his head caved in by Radko Gudas. Like, they're not going to let that happen.
Yeah.
It just takes a bit longer to develop. So from our buddy Liam, is it actually worth moving up or down in this draft? And what positions do you think realistic? We already talked about positional fit, but in this draft, do you see any good cases to move up or down?
100%. I think it would be very beneficial for Detroit to move up. Like we talked about, they've got to be lucky for somebody to fall at 15. Is it likely? It's possible. Um, it happens quite often, but you can always take it into your own hands and move up to make sure that you're getting somebody like a Beckett Seneca, like a Constantinius, like a Berkeley Cadden, right? You're getting one of those high impact forwards. And if you can get yourself into the top 10, move up a few spots and secure one of those players that is the best fit for your organization, it's probably worth it. And if it costs you a second rounder, who cares? Because right now, Detroit's system, the depth is the best component of it, right? Do you really need another second round pick who's 4 or 5 years away? Or would you rather draft a forward who can make an impact in your lineup possibly in 2 years? And that's the difference between picking 15 and maybe picking eighth, ninth, 10th, sixth, if you can convince Utah to move off that pick, right? So I think it would be a great idea for Detroit to explore that.
And the last question we have is from Jean Sebastian Godin. How does Luchenko compare to someone like Danielson or Kasper? And then rank the top offensive potential of MBN, Luchenko, Haig, Hellenius, and Greentree.
Okay, so Luchenko first. I would say he kind of is in the middle of Danielson and Casper in terms of upside. I think, like you said, I think it's kind of becoming a little bit more abundantly clear that Casper's ceiling probably isn't quite as high as we thought it could be when he was drafted. I think there was some hope that this guy could be a first line power forward if everything sort of fit into place. But the creativity and puck skill just isn't at that kind of level. So he looks like more of a middle six guy. Um, Danielson looks like he could be sort of a long time, maybe second line center or second line winger if he ends up shifting off of playing pivot. Um, Luchenko, I think, maybe falls in that middle in terms of upside, because he's definitely not as physically developed as Casper currently is or was when he was drafted. So I think you'd have to be patient with Luchenko, but I think that there's definitely upside there. And who were the four guys that I was supposed to rank? It was Branson, Nygaard, Greentree.
Hellenius, Hage, and Luchenko.
Okay, so I would put in terms of offensive upside, I would probably put Age at one. The most likely to reach that upside, no. But I think in terms of high end upside, I think he would be one. Then I think you probably even go Liam Greentree at two. Again, the likelihood of reaching that upside not as high, because there are some skating concerns that need to be ironed out. But in terms of creativity and skill, Greentree is right up there. He's somebody who, if he makes the NHL, it's going to be in a top six role. That's what he's going to play. He's not going to be a bottom six guy. Either the skating comes around or it doesn't, and he's a quad A player, somebody that just kind of fails to take that next step, like a guy like Michael Del Cole from a few years ago. And then I think probably it was Hellenius, it was MBN and Luchenko, right?
Yep.
So I would go Hellenius and Luchenko probably tied there, and then I would probably put MBN sort of on the bottom. Like I said, I think he's kind of like a Marco Kasper. I think we kind of there are components of his game that we like. I think the shot definitely is one of them, but I think that his power game, the way that he plays, is another. But at the end of the day, is he skilled enough to be a top line guy? Probably not. Is he a safe bet to be a quality NHL player? Yes. I think that's where I kind of compared him to Kasper earlier, and I think that they're kind of similar in that regard. So I'd probably put him fifth on that list in terms of upside.
Do you think maybe he's just a little, maybe a big? I'm not even sure if he's bigger, but maybe just a little more offensive Carter Mazur.
Yeah, I think that's probably a really good example. I think at the end of the day, they probably have similar upsides, right? The draft position that they're going to ultimately have is very different. The routes that they take is very different. But 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, do they project as all that different of players? Probably not.
Awesome. Well, Brock, I want to thank you for coming on the show tonight to talk prospects, Chalk Red Wings pool. Uh, Shout out where people can find you, where they can find your work, what's coming up besides the draft, which we all know is this Friday. So
Yeah, so they can find me on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days, at Brock Otten. You can find my work at excuse me at McKeen's Hockey. We've got our draft guide out. We've just released our mock draft, which is also in our draft guide. We're going to continue to hammer out some pretty lengthy scouting reports. If you haven't read any of our work before, they incorporate a lot of video. There'll be lots of content on social media leading up to the draft as well. So you can get any of that content at mckeenshockey.com. I also have some of my own work at OHL Prospects. Just recently released my annual media scout poll where I poll some of the brightest minds, we'll call them, in the scouting community, guys like the aforementioned Tony Ferrari, like Corey Pronman, like Scott Wheeler, Ryan Kennedy, Stephen Ellis, the names go on. I poll all them a couple times over the course of the year and get some feedback as to who they think the top OHL players available are. Lots of good quotes there. So if you want to check that out, you can check it out at OHL Prospects, which is my site on the side that I've had for almost 2 decades now.
yeah, and the McKeen's draft stuff is even good post draft. So, like you said, you can learn about all the players that you just drafted. All that information is in there. But you can follow us online at Grindline Pod. We can thank the Hockey Podcast Network for hosting us and spreading us around. You can sub to us on YouTube, hit subscribe, and click the notifications button to get notified whenever a episode goes live. We'd like to give a shout out to Vintage Detroit, where we have an exclusive t-shirt deal. So if you go to vintagedetroit.com, click on the Keep It Local tab, you will find our stuff there. But that is going to do it for us tonight. Again, thank you, Brock, for coming on. I am Greg. You stay classy, Hockey Town.